Hello, I'm Anthony. I'm in the process of writing this piece of music at the moment. It's called Darkness Within. I'm just in the process of finishing it, and I used a slightly unusual method of developing the rhythm for it that I'm going to share with you today. What we're going to do today is listen to the finished piece of music, almost finished piece of music. I'll play you a short section of it so that you can hear the rhythm, and then we'll go back and have a look at some of my earlier save points, and I'll explain how this concept, how this rhythm evolves. So what we'll do now is pull this to pieces right back to the beginning of this piece of music, and I'll show you how that rhythm's evolved. So here we are fairly early on in the development of this instrumental. As you can see at the moment, all I've basically done is stacked together all of these various different instrument ideas. I'm going to be able to basically mix and match any of these parts. So here's an example of a pretty stripped down synth sound with all of the drums. So at this stage, I have two different drum rhythms. In fact, I'll turn it off while I talk over the top. Two different drum rhythms here. These top two tracks are the same instrument, but I basically just extracted the kick. I almost always put the kick on its very own VST instrument so that I can handle it completely uniquely. It generally has different requirements and characteristics to all of the other rhythm sections, particularly with your treatment of reverb. But the more interesting stuff comes in the rest of the rhythm. So here's a rhythm that I've basically dragged this MIDI part out into Cubase. So I've auditioned various patterns. I might have edited the pattern inside Groove Agent. It really doesn't matter. Ultimately, we're going to get to the stage where I'm dragging a MIDI pattern into Cubase. That's the point that we start being interested in the thing. And as you can see, there are 8 different drum sounds in this MIDI pattern. What I'm basically going to do at this point is generate 8 separate MIDI parts for every single one of these different drum sounds. But I'm going to store them all in lanes. I can jump over to this second drum kit to demonstrate this because I've already done it here. If I open lanes, this is another MIDI pattern that's being dragged out of the instrument. It's probably Groove 7 because that's the one that's highlighted. But if you look at all of the MIDI parts at the same time, that's what the pattern looks like. The advantage of stripping out these drum lines so that they're one sound per lane is that it's then very easy to mute and unmute individual parts to generate lots of interesting different kinds of interaction between the two rhythms, particularly if you're merging drum kits. I've got 2 drum kits playing side by side here. Let's get everything unmuted. So when we add every single drum sound together, this is the composite sound. You can hear there's actually tonal note information in here. That bass line there has a sound, a tone. Now ultimately I'm going to decide I don't want that. Generally speaking, I don't like tonal information in my rhythm, but all I've done at this point is literally just dragged out every single sound. The next save point I load up will have had all of this done, but just by way of demonstration I'll do one now. So I've selected the part. Much the easiest way to do this is to duplicate the entire MIDI part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and then drag all of those parts down so that they're all stacked on top of each other. Once you've done that, select lane number 1, delete everything except the first note, and then I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to do from this point onwards. So I'm literally just isolating all of the notes. You could do this with logical edit extractions, you could do it with copy and paste, any number of ways. But to be absolutely honest with you, there's not much faster than simply doing it this way. Just don't let yourself get distracted halfway through because it's very easy to forget where you're up to. But there you go. If I select all of those 8 parts now, there's my original rhythm reconstructed, but now they're all on individual lanes. MIDI parts in lanes can be renamed. So if I select this MIDI part and call it ride, I now know exactly what that MIDI part is. However, the lanes themselves can't be renamed. As we go through this demonstration today, I will show you a few limitations of using this lanes approach, but the bottom line is if you want lots of modular flexibility with your rhythms so that you can bring in pieces and take them out again very, very easily, doing it this way is a really nice way to work, because on one hand you get full view of all of your MIDI parts and you get flexibility to do whatever you want with them, but it's also really easy to just close up the lanes and you don't have to worry about creating folders and hiding tracks inside folders and all of that nonsense. So let's have a look at the save file where I've actually finished that job. And here we are back again. You can see that I've named all of the MIDI parts, and I've also done some of that basic culling, that tonal information. We had a bass track somewhere, I think it was in hysteresis. That's all now gone. So I'm doing a little bit of pruning as I'm going. Let's bring everything back in again, make sure everything still sounds okay. But as you can see, it's really, really easy now for me to start developing ideas about which parts of the rhythm sound good together. Most rhythms have got the same basic components, kick, snare, hats, etc. But the ability to mix and match different elements out of each of these two rhythms so easily, and then at a moment's notice, shut it all down and hide all of that complexity, make lanes quite a powerful tool in your toolbox. Let's have a bit closer look at actually what's going on here. Sometimes I'll extract different grooves from the same drum kit. This hysteresis drum kit, for instance, contributed two different hi-hat lines, both using the same sound. This hi-hat closed A, you can see, is an F-sharp 1. The part below it is also an F-sharp 1, and it's at this stage of the project where I'll make sure that I get this kind of stuff under control, because I don't actually want to play both of those sounds at the same time. Very often with drum rhythms, if you play the same kit piece from two different inputs, they actually end up cancelling each other out or phasing. So I don't ever want to hear these two different drum parts at the same time. I'm going to use this lowercase naming convention to make sure that that happens. However, on the other drum kit, I've got parts A and B here that use different notes, and that's simply, at this stage of the process, I hadn't tidied this stuff up. This kind of naming clash where I'm using lowercase letters to refer to different kit pieces is not going to survive very long, because lowercase letters are specifically for that. Don't play both of these MIDI parts at the same time. With that one caveat, however, the rest of the process is literally just a case of making sure that all of these names correspond to the pads. Generally speaking, with Groove Agent, when you drag stuff across, you'll get most of this for free, but very often, because I basically added a load of different hi-hats into this kit when I was coming up with different ideas for sounds, as you can see, there are lots of different pads with the same name. You want to clear all of that stuff up as early as possible to keep everything nice and neat and tidy. Now that I'm up and running with my basic rhythm and I've got those two kits working well together, the next thing that I did was introduce a third kit. Let's just play this and see what lightning sounds like, just added straight on top of those other two rhythms. And here's the lightning rhythm on its own. Exactly the same principle. Figure out how many different drum sounds you've got, create that many MIDI parts, and then get yourself down to the point where each of the MIDI parts only contains a single note. So at this stage, every single one of those MIDI parts contains exactly one kit piece, because this is stage one, building those really atomic modular components that I'm going to use to build the rest of the rhythm. At this point, however, I start exercising a little bit of discretion as to whether or not any of these can be merged together. In other words, there's a situation where part A and part B would never be played separately. I would always play those two together. And so that's what's happened in the next part of the process. Now you can see hi-hat closed 1 + 4. I've brought those two kit pieces together because I've decided pretty arbitrarily that I'm never going to listen to them separately. I'm trying to build usable building blocks here, stuff that I can toggle backwards and forwards, mute on and off, and have a wide range of different rhythmic options, but not overwhelming. I don't want to be constantly trailing up and down with the scroll bar, trying to figure out where my other kit pieces are. So it's a constant balancing exercise between flexibility and usability. Here, for instance, on this particular lane, we've got two different kit pieces. I don't want to hear either of those kit pieces individually, so I've merged them together into a single part. You can see that all of my part names have now been tidied up properly. We don't have any inconsistencies. In fact, I think I've actually got rid of all of my A's and B's at this point. So every different MIDI part has a genuinely different kit piece. I'll get the music playing in the background and I'll mute and unmute some of these kit pieces, and you'll hear that I've worked quite hard to ensure that everything works together so the whole thing is fully modular. None of the different patterns sound bad together. Later on in the process, I'm going to need to be far more creative than this, where I actually start figuring out what things sound good together. The most important thing is that at the moment, nothing sounds bad together. That's all I'm really aiming for. Now, eventually, of course, you have to pin your colours to the mast and actually write a piece of music. So what we have here in the exploded file is I've done that horizontally. I'd taken those 8-bar loops that I'd curated, and I've basically just thrown them off into the distance. This is the point at which I'm actually writing a piece of music now, and as you can see, different parts of the rhythm are coming in and out. And I'm not really hampered by using lanes rather than dedicated MIDI tracks at all. There are a couple of very minor examples where I do need to be careful. One of them comes with cleaning up lanes. Now at the moment, all of these different parts are muted, but if I got to the situation where I was starting to delete the stuff that I decided I didn't want anymore, I need to be really careful about cleaning lanes, because if I do so, as you can see, the MIDI parts now go out of sync, so I don't have that kind of horizontal view that I used to have when everything was nice and neat. I also don't yet have full control in the mixer of these tracks, because at the moment everything as far as the mix is concerned is on a single track. So ultimately I'm going to need to make a decision as to whether or not I want to explode them onto their own tracks for mixing control. All of this is about the songwriting process. If you ever get to the situation where you decide that lanes are too inflexible and you want to turn them into real tracks, you literally just have to right click on the track, create tracks from lanes. As you can see, I have a keyboard shortcut for it because it's something that I do very commonly. That solves your problem, and now you're into genuine one track per sound territory. But as a proof of concept, I decided to write this piece of music, not even executing that step. I got right to the end just using lanes and never actually exploded them out into their own MIDI tracks. It required doing a bit more velocity controlling inside the MIDI parts themselves, which, to be honest, I wouldn't ordinarily do, but I wanted to demonstrate that it is at least feasible to write an entire piece of music this way. One final thing I want to talk about today using this approach is your post-edit processes. In pretty much any artistic endeavour, you can't anticipate everything up front. How many films have to pull the actors back to recut, to refilm scenes that they didn't get quite right first time? It's very much the same with a piece of music. I found holes or gaps in this rhythm section that I needed to go back and retrospectively fill. And speaking of the word fills, that was one of the things that I needed to take care of. There were various parts where I needed to add drum fills that I hadn't previously catered for. This was very easy to do. All I did was went back into the kit, over to the pattern department, selected each of my fills one at a time, dragged them out onto my MIDI track that I'd called fills, and here they all are. There's fills 1 to 8, nicely labelled so that I can see what I'm doing. And then I went through the song, adding these fills in as required. It's down on lane 4, and here you can see all the various fills that I've used. So of course that initial stage where you're setting up the rhythm is not locked in stone. Nobody's telling you that that's all you're allowed to do. You can always go back and edit this stuff later. So let's have a quick look at this entire rhythm. You can see that I've retained exactly the same structure. All of my lanes are still fully intact. All of those muted MIDI parts, of course muting is a very temporary solution. You can always undo it whenever you want. But when I'm really happy that I like the way that the song is sounding, I'll actually delete all of the muted parts, and that tells me that that section of the song that I'm working on between bars 89 and 97 If there are no muted parts in that, it means I am completely happy with that. If there are muted parts anywhere else in the song, it means it's still up for grabs. I might change my mind and there needs to be some work on that song. So it's very much like a sketch pad where I'm making notes about what's finished and what still needs to be done. And I think that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.